This is not just the story of a factory closure. It is a warning signal echoing across California's economic landscape. When Coca-Cola shutters a bottling facility in its own backyard, the headlines focus on jobs lost and political reactions. But beneath that surface lies a deeper, more unsettling question. What happens when global corporations, local communities, and state policy begin pulling in opposite directions? As California grapples with rising costs, regulatory pressure, and shifting corporate strategies, the shutdown exposes fault lines that affect workers, small cities, and the state's long-term identity as an economic powerhouse. Workers, communities, and the human cost of corporate restructuring. The closure of a Coca-Cola bottling facility does not begin as an abstract economic event. It begins in parking lots, break rooms, and kitchen tables. In Napa County and Salinas, employees arrived to work expecting routine, only to learn that decades of stability had been erased by a corporate decision made hundreds of miles away. For many workers, these bottling plants were not stepping stones, but destinations. Jobs that offered union wages, benefits, and a sense of permanence in an increasingly unstable labor market. When the doors closed, that sense of permanence vanished overnight. In small and mid-sized California cities, manufacturing facilities function as economic anchors. The loss of 135 jobs in American Canyon rippled far beyond those directly employed. Local diners lost regular customers. Trucking routes changed. Suppliers saw contracts quietly end. Municipal budgets dependent on payroll taxes and business activity suddenly faced gaps that no press release could fill. While state leaders emphasized California's overall economic strength, communities felt the impact in more immediate, personal terms. Mortgage payments, college tuition, and healthcare coverage thrown into question. The emotional toll cannot be separated from the financial one. Workers described feeling blindsided, not because they believed Coca-Cola was struggling, but because the company was not. At the same moment these jobs disappeared, Coca-Cola's global operating margins hovered near historic highs. From the perspective of employees, the closure did not feel like necessity. It felt like optimization, a strategic decision to streamline operations, reduce capital exposure, and move production into fewer, more flexible facilities run by third-party partners. This disconnect fuels resentment. Workers are told the economy is strong, the brand is profitable, and the state remains innovative, yet they are the ones absorbing the shock. Retraining programs and job placement services exist, but they often fail to replace the wages and stability provided by legacy manufacturing roles. Transitioning from a unionized bottling job into service or logistics work usually means lower pay, fewer benefits, and less security. For older workers, retraining is not a bridge, it is a gamble. The broader trend compounds the damage. California's manufacturing share of GDP has steadily declined over the past decade, shrinking the pool of comparable jobs. Automation and globalization play roles, but energy costs, compliance expenses, and facility upgrade requirements add pressure unique to the state. When closures cluster in food and beverage manufacturing, they hollow out a sector that once provided accessible middle-class employment without requiring advanced degrees. Public reaction often lags behind private reality. Official statements emphasize resilience and innovation, but resilience does not pay rent. Innovation does not replace a pension. The human cost of these closures is not temporary disruption, it is long-term displacement. Communities built around stable employers struggle to redefine themselves, while workers are left navigating an economy that increasingly rewards flexibility over loyalty. This is the first fracture revealed by the Coca-Cola shutdown, a growing gap between corporate efficiency and community stability. As companies move faster and leaner, the people and places that supported them for decades are left carrying the weight of decisions they had no voice in making. Corporate strategy, state policy, and the economic tension beneath the headlines. From a corporate perspective, the Coca-Cola shutdown in California was not an emotional decision. It was a calculated one. By 2025, Coca-Cola had largely completed a global restructuring strategy that reshaped how the company operates, invests, and grows. Instead of owning and maintaining capital-intensive bottling plants, the company pivoted toward an asset-light model, one that prioritizes brand ownership, marketing power, and product innovation, while outsourcing manufacturing and distribution to specialized bottling partners. On paper, the logic is compelling. Lower capital risk, greater flexibility, faster response to changing consumer trends. Financially, the results appeared to justify the move. Coca-Cola eliminated roughly 2,200 jobs worldwide, discontinued nearly 200 underperforming brands, and streamlined its operations into fewer, more efficient production hubs. Operating margins climbed toward 30%. Free cash flow projections reached into the billions. For shareholders, the message was clear: discipline works. But for states like California, the implications were far more complicated. California is not just another operating environment. It is one of the most regulated, expensive, and politically scrutinized business ecosystems in the world. Energy costs are higher. Environmental compliance is stricter. Facility upgrades demand long-term capital commitments with uncertain regulatory outcomes. For a company actively reducing fixed assets, California becomes harder to justify, not because it lacks talent or infrastructure, but because it requires patience and permanence in a corporate era that rewards speed and flexibility. This tension sits at the heart of the controversy. Critics of California's business climate seized on the Coca-Cola closure as proof that taxes, regulations, and energy mandates are pushing employers out. Editorials frame the shutdown as the latest example of a hostile environment for manufacturers. Business groups warned that if even Coca-Cola cannot make the numbers work, smaller firms stand little chance. The narrative spread quickly, amplified by political polarization and election year rhetoric. Yet the data tells a more restrained story. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, the state's overall rate of corporate departures aligns closely with national averages. Between 2018 and 2024, California lost only a small net number of corporate headquarters, most of them smaller firms with fewer than 500 employees. At the same time, new companies, particularly in technology and biotechnology, continue to arrive. From a macroeconomic view, California is not collapsing. It is transforming. But transformation creates winners and losers, and manufacturing is increasingly on the losing side. Unlike tech firms that can scale digitally, manufacturing depends on physical space, energy, transportation, and compliance. When companies like Coca-Cola restructure globally, they do not evaluate states emotionally. They evaluate them mathematically. Every regulation becomes a line item. Every mandate becomes a cost comparison. In that equation, California often struggles to compete with lower-cost states that offer regulatory simplicity and cheaper utilities. State leaders face a dilemma with no easy answer: relax regulations, and they risk undermining environmental and labor protections that define California's identity. Maintain the current framework, and they risk accelerating the exit of traditional employers. Public messaging attempts to strike a balance, celebrating innovation while downplaying losses. But closures like this make the tension visible. The absence of a dramatic response from the governor's office was itself telling. There was no fiery rebuttal, no emergency summit, no direct confrontation with Coca-Cola. Instead, officials reiterated familiar themes: workforce strength, innovation leadership, economic scale. To supporters, this signaled confidence. To critics, it looked like denial. The silence became a canvas onto which both sides projected their arguments. This is the second fracture exposed by the shutdown, a structural mismatch between corporate strategy and state policy. As global brands optimize for flexibility and efficiency, states built around long-term industrial investment must decide whether to adapt, resist, or redefine what economic success truly means. Political narratives, public perception, and the battle over California's economic identity. Once the factory doors closed, the story no longer belonged solely to workers or corporate executives. It entered the political arena, where facts compete with narratives and perception often moves faster than data. The Coca-Cola shutdown became a symbol, used, reshaped, and amplified to support broader arguments about California's future. For critics of state leadership, it was a rallying cry. For defenders, it was a case study in how global forces, not local policy alone, drive corporate decisions. Commentary quickly framed the closure as evidence of a business exodus. Headlines warned that iconic brands were abandoning California. Talk shows linked the bottling plant shutdown to a growing list of high-profile corporate moves, suggesting a domino effect. In this environment, nuance struggled to survive. Few discussions distinguished between corporate headquarters, manufacturing facilities, or outsourced bottling operations. The complexity of Coca-Cola's asset-light strategy was often reduced to a simple conclusion: California is losing. This pattern repeated with other companies. Reports about In-N-Out Burger opening offices in Tennessee were widely portrayed as the chain leaving California, despite the company maintaining hundreds of locations and major operations in the state. Similar narratives followed Tesla's headquarters relocation years earlier, even though engineering and design teams remained in California. These stories fed a perception that loyalty to the state was eroding, even when the operational reality was far more layered. Public confusion became part of the problem. Personal decisions by executives blurred with corporate strategy. Expansion into other regions was interpreted as abandonment. Each headline added pressure to policymakers, reinforcing the idea that California was at risk of losing its economic soul. For voters already anxious about cost of living, housing, and job security, the Coca-Cola closure felt like confirmation of a broader decline. Supporters of California's current approach pushed back. They argued that the state remains the world's fifth largest economy for a reason: talent concentration, innovation ecosystems, and market access. They pointed out that tech and biotech firms continue to grow, that venture capital flows remain strong, and that many companies leave only to maintain significant operations within the state. From this perspective, the Coca-Cola shutdown was not a verdict on California, but a reflection of how legacy manufacturing is changing everywhere. Still, political messaging struggled to address the emotional weight of the loss. For communities watching trucks roll out of shuttered facilities, reassurances about startups and innovation hubs felt distant. The debate became less about economic statistics and more about identity. California has long seen itself as a place where industries are born, scale, and stay. When that promise weakens, even slightly, it triggers existential questions. Lawmakers on both sides used the moment to advance competing visions. Some called for regulatory reform and targeted relief for manufacturers. Others warned against sacrificing environmental and labor standards in pursuit of short-term retention. The Coca-Cola closure became a proxy battle in a much larger argument about what kind of economy California wants to be in the next decade. This is the third fracture, the widening gap between perception and reality. While the data shows stability mixed with transition, public narrative leans toward crisis. And in politics, narrative often shapes policy more powerfully than spreadsheets. As long as closures like this dominate the conversation, California's economic identity will remain contested, caught between reinvention and nostalgia, adaptation and resistance. What comes next and why it matters? The Coca-Cola shutdown is not an ending. It is a crossroads. It forces California to confront uncomfortable truths about globalization, corporate strategy, and the limits of state policy in a mobile economy. Workers, communities, corporations, and lawmakers are all affected, some gaining efficiency and flexibility, others losing stability and certainty. The challenge now is not choosing sides, but finding solutions that balance competitiveness with protection, innovation with accountability. The future of California's economy will be shaped not just by decisions made in boardrooms or capitals, but by public debate. Share your perspective, because what happens next depends on who speaks up